Hey everybody, in today's video I'm going to show you, yes you at home, I'm going to show you how to chop jungle breaks. And I'm going to dispense some wisdom to you regarding the art of sampling and chopping, right? I want to take this beyond a tutorial on like how to make epic PS1 game music. Anyway, so let's get into it. Okay, first things first that you must do. I recommend finding the original source material that the breaks you're looking for originate from. And by that I mean, rather than going to somewhere that has pre-chopped or pre-sliced the breaks for you, looking for the full context of where it came from. What's happening is you're missing all the other elements of the break that are really interesting. However, there might be parts that you can use creatively on your sampling. So for example, there might be a vocal sound or like an instrument or a rustle in the background, and that could be a really fun element to play with versus just only choosing what is the perfect or closest to perfect elements of that sample. Okay, so what's one of the first things you'll notice? Oh, hold on, I'll get out of your face. So I know some of you are like, ooh, this is my favorite perspective. No. So one of the first things you'll notice about this is I'm actually using sounds that a lot of people will cut out, right? It's more of a textural element than it is a vocal element. And when we think of it that way now, it becomes so much more interesting. Number two, this is another thing that I think so many people miss out on when they're chopping breaks and producing jungle, and that is that they're not really following the groove of the break. Every drummer is unique, every situation is unique, and the recording environments and so on have their own character and personality. And I find so many people when they're chopping up breaks, they don't really hear sped up or slowed down the original groove of the drummer, and you're really missing what makes so much of the legendary tracks that we know of in jungle unique. Right, when you think of the greatest people in jungle to sort of do break chopping, that's the fundamental thing that differentiates them from everybody else. It's because they understand the groove of the break.
That sounds like it's got little clicks in it. I think it's important to leave a bit of a loop in your, don't everything like a drum machine programmed, because it will sound like a drum machine. It won't have a particularly like rolling beat.
We're not sticking so perfectly to the grid. Groove often is not only just in touch, the way that you actually touch the instrument and sort of play it, but also in the spacing of everything. You'll notice that within our grid, things are swaying off the beat, and that's because the tambourine sort of is not an instrument that's going to always be on. So naturally, when they're playing it, there's many times like a little bit of swing as you're swaying it back and forth. So that gives this break its groove. And not only that, right, we're not keeping everything perfectly on the grid. Not that there's anything wrong with that. If I'm making drum and bass, for example, the things are going to be much more rigid in terms of trying to keep our kick and snare right on that grid. Though I think there's room for play, and a lot of times that'll be in the shuffles and in the in-betweens. But if we sort of look directly on here, right, we're kind of sitting a little bit behind where we would expect it to sit, and that's totally okay, because in context, even if you're like DJing stuff and you're fading in between tracks, you should check out my jungle set, by the way, they're always going to be a little bit off, and that's kind of the beauty of it. It feels a little bit more live and more performative. When it comes to chopping our samples, I think it's really good to not cut into the transient too much. You'll see how I'm cutting at the beginning of like the kick sound, but not too much. Like it's sitting on the grid kind of where it should be, but everything else is falling or moving around a little bit. And you can see the same here. It's not like perfectly cut. However, a lot of times you want to make sure you get that more precise if you're doing snare rolls where you're triggering that sample many times. Then that little delay becomes super, super noticeable. And of course, I don't want that, and I don't think you want that, okay? Number three, one of the things people make mistakes on too is actually sort of choosing the wrong break to meet the feeling or vibe of the song that they're working on. Each performance, each drum kit, and each situation sort of has its own feel. The Amen break has its own sort of vibe. Think has its own vibe. Cold Sweat, Soul Pride, all of these breaks have their unique quirks and things that make them interesting. And so many people, I think, kind of will default to maybe breaks that aren't serving their track as well. I think one really underestimated thing with chopping is really practicing restraint and thinking about how does this element that I'm sampling fit into the greater context of what I'm trying to work on. Okay, so now I want to kill two stones with one bird. I want to show you a more advanced sample chop, but also kind of explain to you how using a break that is performed differently can add to the song. So in this part of the song, right, it actually is much more subdued. I wanted to have a different harmonic change in the background, so I changed to a softer, more relaxed instrumentation, and because of that, I wanted to have a break that is a little bit more softer and relaxed. I just want to show you in context of the whole song, and we're just going to show half of the sample chopping. Now, another thing you're going to notice about this break, it's very syncopated. There's a lot of syncopation going on, and this is just something that you have to take time to understand. And the reason that I'm doing that in this part of the song is because the harmony is more basic. We don't have like those crazy elements going on, but I want to keep that constant sense of interest. And because there's not many elements going on, rather than having to maintain a very consistent break structure because the underlying instrumentation is much more complex, when we get to the breakdown of our break chopping, right, we can do something much more complicated. So when you're chopping breaks, really think about, what's happening underneath and other stuff that's going on in the music. Zoom out and listen to what's going on. So if you notice, there's a clear motif going on. The beginning of the break tends to sound very similar, and it's grounding us into the musical performance and creating a constant sense of expectation, something that's going to be played on the dance floor. So I want to have some sense of consistency for the people moving, because this performance is going to be much more difficult for people to sort of move to on the dance floor, and I know that when I'm arranging it. And because it's softer, this might be a situation where people are sort of maybe shuffling around or moving to a different area, or like maybe checking a message that they got. They're what they're going to be doing on the dance floor is not getting into it. It's giving them a little break and a time to recollect themselves. So they're probably just going to be kind of gently nodding their heads, and that's totally okay. As long as they're kind of feeling where that beat is and they're not going too crazy, that's my whole goal. And so we're constantly having that anchor at the beginning of our break performance, but as we get into it, we're constantly defying those expectations by adjusting the syncopation. And really the part where this is sort of epitomized is later. By using that triplet, because in the song there's like almost essentially no use of a triplet in that manner, so it makes this a much more interesting musical event that goes on by doing a sort of triplet fill. And this sort of triplet feel you'll hear a lot in drummers and drum solos, and J.D. Beck will do this all kinds, like constantly in his playing. Even though he's playing at a blaringly fast tempo in the same way that we're producing. So really, we're kind of melding a lot of influences that are not just, oh, I want to make a song that sounds like Photech, or this reminds me of this other jungle artist. Like, you need to get out, you need to listen to other music than jungle, and get out there and go back to the OG so you can bring it back into your jungle and make it uniquely you. Whether or not you like my song, you have to admit, there's a lot of production and thought that goes into it. And it's a representation of me, like my personality's in there. It's not me just trying to make a Bambakrat junglist tune in Niprov.
As you can see, this is the sound of Anita Baker. This is soul. Just giving you a taste that it's not about anything else, it's about the samples. Whether soul, whether reggae, is still black influenced. That's why the boys are onto this lately.
Inform the music with their own sampling, with their own experiences, and to make the music a bit more relevant to what they wanted to hear and what they were feeling. The computer technology just created a whole generation of bedroom junglists.
Number 4. This is a big issue that I see so many people do, and it's running before they can walk. They go in, they try to chop breaks and be like the masters, and they don't really understand the fundamentals of groove and phrasing with your drums. This is something that is so important, and if you don't understand this, you're probably never going to really reach a high level of drum editing, because you're not really thinking of these drums as a performance, you're thinking of them as a sample. And everything that is played by a musician is performance. And if you really want to alter that performance to meet your own taste and your own desires, you really need to understand that drums, even if they aren't like a melody, there's a musical phrase going on with each and every sound that is being produced. And if you don't follow that sort of concept through all of the way that you're making music, you're just going to completely lose what makes jungle jungle, at least on the high level. If you don't believe me regarding performance, here's some excerpts from the pros back in the day.
Basically, I'm interested in just rhythms and rhythm and textures of sounds. That's kind of what, you know, I pick sounds for the texture of them, and they might make, you know, trigger me thinking about old records, like old jazz records, or, you know, soul or jazz fusion things. And I think anyone's style is just what else they're into outside jungle. That's where they select their sounds from.
It's quite difficult to like define your own sound. You sort of search for it. You just like go back to your like old influences, like all the old breakbeat that we've listened to, all different styles of like jazz, like fusion jazz.
I mean, my influences really start from people like Marvin Gaye, Herbie Hancock, Yellow Jackets, Bob James, more of a sort of jazz, funk, fusion and soul-based background.
The inspiration for me was just really I heard some things that were so different from what I'd heard before, and that's what inspired me, do you know what I mean, rather than one person.
It was for me when I was at school and I was just listening to, I was in the whole rave scene and the hip-hop early scene, and it was difficult really because I was like 14, 15 and I couldn't get into pubs.
I'm not going too crazy with the way that I'm chopping this break, but you can hear it's very vocal driven. There's a lot of density to the bass arrangement and everything else. We need to find a way to sort of allow that stuff to shine, but make the drums also a very important and integral part. So when we're doing our edits, we're not spending so much time trying to get crazy, because there's always like a balance that you have to strike. Right, there are little things, the break will drop out and we have this cool reversal, time stretched, and that just sort of gives us some more playfulness to what's going on. You'll also notice that I have another break layered underneath this, and this is a classic one too, and it's, do the do. So here's how this one sounds on its own. So I'm sort of just doubling what's happening underneath. There's many times you can get really advanced and have like polyrhythmic events going on where you have one break playing one thing and it's another underneath, and it can almost sort of have like a marching band kind of feel, or sort of like if you've ever heard like a drum circle and there's multiple instruments soloing off at the same time. That's another way if you want to have like a more advanced sort of dual layering of like multiple drum things happening. But for this video, I don't want to get into that because that's much more complex, and if you're watching this video, I feel I don't want to overwhelm you. But one thing you're going to notice is, right, when I combine them, they're very much doubled. That's how those two breaks are combined together in this song. And then we also have another one going on, which is our classic, and this is like the Soul Pride break. And chopping Soul Pride is actually a much more difficult and advanced break to chop, in my opinion. So like every break has its own like difficulty levels. I think is really easy. Do the do is a little bit more difficult, but then you get into things like Soul Pride, and then like the Blow-Fi break, and there's a bunch of others where the performance actually is really nuanced. But anyways, here's like a very simple chop of the Soul Pride break. What we can do with this break is we're drawing the attention somewhere else, and there's a timbral shift because the recording is completely different and the drum set's different, of course, and we're doing a variation on the pattern that's been happening before. And what that allows us to do is sort of use this different drum sound not only to draw attention, but it becomes its own drum fill. But also I have another break layered underneath it, which isn't really common. Just because the other break had a tambourine, and I still wanted to keep a tambourine element in the background, but I didn't want it to be think, and I also didn't want it to be the hot pants break, because those are so like common, shallow, pedantic even, you know, just so shallow. So I wanted to do something different, and We just have that 16th note rhythm going on in the background of the tambourine over and over, and it just keeps that momentum up when we're chopping, because without it, it just sounds a little bit too empty. So the editing of these drums isn't exactly how I want it. So there's things I want to change in the future, but I just want to give you an example of, you know, how we can use a different break selection to match the performance of our song. I like to draw personal elements of the music that I listen to in my sampling and the way that I write music. So I think it's really important that you do too, whether you listen to metal, you're a classical person, whatever it is, really throw that element in. Okay, it looks like you made it through this entire video. I'm really proud of you, kiddo. Thank you so much for watching, and I really hope that all the stuff that I taught you in here was useful, and you may actually have to spend quite a bit of time really putting these things into practice. You're not gonna like snap your fingers and have like an amazing track. It's just going to take time, and there's a lot of nuance in writing this kind of music, whether people realize it or not. Anyways, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.